In the heart of a bustling suburban shopping mall, where families strolled hand in hand and the air buzzed with cheerful chatter, Special Agent Marcus Hayes decided to take a rare day off. For years, Marcus had dedicated his life to serving in the FBI, handling cases that ranged from counterterrorism operations to high-profile investigations. But today was different. Today, he wasn't chasing criminals or deciphering cryptic clues. He was simply trying to enjoy some downtime by buying gifts for his family. Marcus stepped out of his car wearing a sleek leather jacket paired with neatly pressed slacks. His polished shoes clicked softly against the tiled floor as he made his way toward the electronics store on the second floor. The store was known for its cutting-edge gadgets and top-of-the-line products, attracting tech enthusiasts and shoppers looking for premium items. As Marcus entered, he couldn't help but notice how bright and inviting the space felt. Rows of shiny smartphones, laptops, and headphones lined the shelves, each one gleaming under the warm glow of overhead lights. He wandered through the aisles casually, taking in the sights and sounds around him. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing excitedly at gaming consoles, while teenagers huddled near the headphone displays, testing out the latest models. Marcus smiled faintly at the scene. It reminded him of simpler times before. His demanding career took over most of his days. Eventually, his attention landed on a display featuring expensive wireless headphones. They were sleek, modern, and boasted impressive features like noise cancellation and crystal-clear sound quality. Intrigued, Marcus picked up a pair to examine them more closely. He turned them over in his hands, checking the design and reading the specifications printed on the box. Satisfied with what he saw, he set the headphones back down gently, intending to continue browsing before making a decision. Unbeknownst to Marcus, two rookie police officers, Officer Ryan Keller and Officer Lisa Monroe, were patrolling nearby. Both were relatively new to the force, eager to prove themselves after being criticized by their superiors for not making enough arrests. Their patrol route often brought them past the electronics store, which had recently experienced a string of shoplifting incidents. Determined to catch someone in the act, they kept a close eye on anyone who lingered too long near the pricey merchandise. From across the store, Officer Keller spotted Marcus. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the man. He appeared to be an ordinary shopper examining a product. But something about Marcus's demeanor caught Keller's attention. Maybe it was the way he held the headphones, turning them over carefully. Or perhaps it was the fact that he seemed so composed and deliberate in his movements. Whatever it was, Keller nudged his partner, Officer Monroe, and nodded subtly in Marcus's direction. "Look at that guy," Keller whispered, his voice low but tinged with suspicion. "He's acting weird. I think he might be casing the place." Monroe squinted, studying Marcus from afar. She noticed his casual attire, a leather jacket, slacks, and polished shoes, and frowned slightly. "He doesn't exactly look like your typical thief," she murmured, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Keller shrugged, brushing off her hesitation. "You can never tell these days. People dress nice to blend in. Besides, we've got reports of stolen electronics all week. It's worth checking out." The two officers exchanged a quick glance, silently agreeing to approach Marcus. As they moved closer, their minds began filling with assumptions based on ingrained biases they weren't even fully aware of. To them, Marcus's appearance, his dark skin, confident posture, and sharp clothing, didn't align with the image of someone who belonged in such an upscale environment. Without realizing it, they let those subconscious prejudices color their judgment. When they reached the aisle where Marcus stood, they positioned themselves strategically behind him, watching his every move. Marcus, completely unaware of their presence, continued browsing peacefully. He picked up another item, a portable speaker, and examined it briefly before placing it back on the shelf. To anyone else, this would have seemed like normal behavior. But to Keller and Monroe, it only deepened their suspicion. "He's definitely up to something," Keller muttered under his breath. "Let's stop him before he walks out with something." Monroe hesitated for a moment, glancing around to see if anyone else seemed concerned. No one did. Shoppers passed by without giving Marcus a second thought. Still, she nodded reluctantly, trusting her partner's instincts, or so she told herself. As Marcus reached for yet another gadget, Keller cleared his throat loudly, stepping forward to block his path. Startled, Marcus turned to face the officer, his expression calm but questioning. Behind Keller, Monroe hovered nervously, her hand resting lightly on the grip of her holstered weapon. The tension in the air was palpable, though Marcus couldn't understand why. "Excuse me, sir," Keller began, his tone sharp and authoritative. "Can you explain what you're doing here?" Marcus blinked, taken aback by the sudden confrontation. "I'm just shopping," he replied evenly, his voice steady despite the unexpected intrusion. "Is there a problem?" Keller ignored the question, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized Marcus. "Why were you handling those headphones so carefully?" He pressed, gesturing vaguely toward the display. "Were you planning to steal them?" The accusation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Stealing? Him? The absurdity of the claim left him momentarily speechless. He glanced around, noticing that a small crowd had begun to gather, curious about the commotion. Some shoppers paused, mid-step, craning their necks to get a better view, while others pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. For a brief moment, Marcus considered walking away, dismissing the situation as a misunderstanding, but then he realized that doing so would only escalate things further. Instead, he forced himself to remain calm, choosing his words carefully. "I was looking at the headphones because I'm interested in buying them," he explained, his tone firm but polite. "That's all." But Keller wasn't satisfied. If anything, Marcus's composed response only fueled his suspicions. "Do you have any ID on you?" he demanded, crossing his arms over his chest. "We need to verify who you are." Marcus hesitated, weighing his options. Legally, he knew he didn't have to show ID unless he was detained under reasonable suspicion. Yet refusing outright risked provoking the officers further. After a beat, he shook his head slightly. "I don't need to show you my ID," he said evenly. "I haven't done anything wrong." His refusal ignited a spark of anger in Keller, whose patience was already wearing thin. "If you don't cooperate, we'll have no choice but to escort you outside for questioning," he snapped, his voice rising above the hum of the crowd. By now, the situation had drawn significant attention. Shoppers whispered among themselves, speculating about what was happening. A few gasped audibly when they heard Keller's threat, while others muttered disapproving comments under their breath. Through it all, Marcus remained outwardly unfazed, though inside he felt a growing sense of frustration. How had a simple trip to buy gifts turned into this? And yet, unbeknownst to everyone, including Keller and Monroe, the real twist was still to come. Little did they know, the man standing before them wasn't just an ordinary citizen. He was a highly trained federal agent with secrets far beyond their wildest imaginations. The tension in the electronics store was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood his ground, his posture calm but firm, as Officer Keller continued to press him with accusatory questions. The crowd around them grew larger, murmurs rippling through the onlookers like waves. Some people craned their necks to get a better view, while others discreetly pulled out their phones to record the unfolding scene. Despite the chaos building around him, Marcus kept his focus squarely on the officers, refusing to let their aggressive tone rattle him. Officer Keller, growing increasingly agitated by Marcus's refusal to comply, stepped closer, invading his personal space. "Sir, if you've got nothing to hide, then why won't you show us your ID?" he demanded, his voice louder now, almost barking. His eyes darted between Marcus's face and the display of headphones, as though trying to piece together some invisible evidence that didn't exist. Behind him, Officer Monroe shifted uncomfortably, her hand still hovering near her holster. She glanced at the growing crowd, clearly uneasy about the spectacle they were creating but unwilling, or perhaps unable, to intervene. Marcus took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before responding. "I'm not required to show you my identification," he said, his voice steady despite the rising pressure. "I haven't done anything wrong and I'm simply here to shop. If you have a legitimate reason to detain me, then state it." Otherwise, I'd like to continue with my day." His words were measured, professional, and carried an air of authority that seemed to catch both officers off guard. For a split second, Keller faltered, his confidence wavering. But instead of backing down, he doubled down, his frustration boiling over into outright hostility. "You think you're above the law or something?" he snapped, jabbing a finger toward Marcus. "We're just doing our job. Cooperate, or things are going to get worse for you." The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it was so blatantly false. Marcus had spent years upholding the law, dedicating his life to protecting the very system these officers were now misusing against him. He clenched his jaw briefly, fighting back the urge to retaliate with anger. Instead, he reminded himself to stay composed. Losing his temper wouldn't help. It would only give them more ammunition to use against him. As the standoff continued, the atmosphere in the store shifted. What had started as casual curiosity among the onlookers began to morph into something else: discomfort, disbelief, and even outrage. A middle-aged woman standing nearby shook her head disapprovingly. "This is ridiculous," she muttered loud enough for those around her to hear. "He hasn't done anything." Her comment sparked a ripple of agreement from others, their whispers growing louder and more pointed. Keller must have sensed the tide turning against him because his demeanor became even more defensive. He turned slightly, addressing the crowd as much as Marcus. "Look, we're just trying to keep this place safe," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "If everyone cooperated, we wouldn't have problems like this." His attempt to justify their actions fell flat. Several shoppers exchanged skeptical glances, and one young man boldly raised his phone higher, ensuring he captured every moment of the confrontation. "You're harassing him for no reason," the man called out, his voice carrying across the store. "That's messed up." Monroe shot him a sharp look, her cheeks flushing red. "Mind your own business," she warned, though her voice wavered slightly. It was clear she was struggling to maintain control of the situation, her earlier hesitation now fully blossoming into doubt. Meanwhile, Marcus remained unfazed by the escalating drama. He knew that arguing further would only prolong the ordeal, so he decided to take a different approach. Keeping his hands visible and relaxed at his sides, he locked eyes with Keller and spoke directly, his tone calm but firm. "Officer, I understand. You're just doing your duty, but I assure you I'm not a threat. I'm here to shop, plain and simple. If you need proof, I can provide it, but I'd appreciate it if we could handle this respectfully." For a brief moment, it seemed like Keller might actually listen. His shoulders relaxed slightly and his grip on the radio at his belt loosened. But then Monroe leaned in, whispering something urgently in his ear. Whatever she said reignited his aggression, and he straightened up, his expression hardening once again. "Respectfully? You want respect? Then show us some cooperation," he barked, his voice echoing through the store. At this point, Marcus realized that reasoning with them wasn't going to work. These officers weren't interested in logic or fairness. They were determined to assert their authority, regardless of whether they were right or wrong. And so, with a quiet sigh, he made a decision. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his inner jacket pocket. The movement was smooth and unhurried, but it was enough to send both officers into a panic. "Hey, stop right there," Keller shouted, his hand flying to his holster as he took a step back. Monroe mirrored his reaction, her own weapon halfway drawn as she shouted, "Don't move." The crowd gasped audibly, several people stepping backward in alarm. Phones trembled in shaky hands as videos captured the officer's dramatic response. Marcus froze mid-motion, his fingers still inches away from his pocket. He looked at them, incredulously, his calm demeanor finally cracking as frustration bubbled to the surface. "I'm reaching for my wallet," he said, his voice sharper now, tinged with exasperation. "Not a weapon. My wallet." But the officers weren't listening. Their training, and perhaps their fear, had kicked in, overriding any semblance of rational thought. Keller barked another command, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "Keep your hands where we can see them, now." Realizing that further resistance would only escalate the situation, Marcus complied, raising his hands slowly above his head. All right," he said, his tone clipped but controlled. I'll do what you say. But you need to understand. You're making a big mistake. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone watching. Here was a man being treated like a criminal, accused of theft without a shred of evidence, all because two officers had jumped to conclusions based on appearances alone. The injustice of it hung heavy in the air, palpable and undeniable. As the seconds ticked by, the tension reached a fever pitch. Keller and Monroe stood their ground, weapons drawn and eyes locked on Marcus, while the crowd watched in stunned silence. Some people whispered prayers under their breath, hoping the situation wouldn't spiral further out of control. Others recorded fervently, knowing that whatever happened next would likely go viral online. And yet, amidst the chaos, Marcus remained eerily calm. He knew that the truth was on his side, and he also knew that revealing it would change everything, for better or worse. All he had to do was wait for the right moment. The standoff in the electronics store had reached a boiling point. Marcus stood with his hands raised above his head, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. Officer Keller and Officer Monroe were still on edge, their weapons partially drawn as they barked orders at him. The crowd around them was now larger than ever, murmuring anxiously, snapping photos, and recording videos. Some people whispered words of encouragement to Marcus, while others stared in shock at the unfolding scene. It was clear that no one, least of all the officers, knew exactly how this confrontation would end. Keller's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Keep your hands where we can see them," he repeated, his tone sharp and panicked. His eyes darted nervously between Marcus's face and the jacket pocket he'd been reaching for earlier. Monroe, standing slightly behind her partner, looked equally uneasy but tried to project confidence by keeping her hand firmly on her holster. Despite their bravado, both officers seemed rattled, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Marcus exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thin but his resolve unwavering. He knew that continuing to resist would only escalate things further, so he spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not armed, and I'm not a threat," he said, enunciating each word carefully. "I told you I'm reaching for my wallet. If you want proof of who I am, let me show you." For a moment, there was silence. Keller hesitated, glancing at Monroe as if seeking guidance. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, though her grip on her weapon didn't loosen. Finally, Keller relented, but only slightly. "All right," he growled, lowering his gun just a fraction. "But go slow. One wrong move and we won't hesitate to act." With that, Marcus slowly lowered his right hand toward his inner jacket pocket. Every movement was deliberate, calculated to avoid alarming the already jittery officers. The crowd held its collective breath, watching intently as his fingers brushed against the fabric of his jacket. Then, with a fluid motion, he pulled out a sleek leather wallet and something else. Something shiny, something official. It was his FBI badge. As soon as the golden insignia caught the light, the entire store seemed to freeze. Time itself appeared to stop as Marcus flipped open the badge, revealing the unmistakable emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, along with his name and credentials. For a split second, neither officer reacted. They simply stared, wide-eyed and slack-jawed, as realization dawned on their faces. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Hayes," he announced, his voice carrying authority and finality. "And I suggest you both lower your weapons before this situation gets even more out of hand." The transformation in Keller and Monroe was immediate and dramatic. Their weapons dropped completely, their arms falling limply to their sides. Keller's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Monroe took a step back, her face flushing red with embarrassment. The weight of what they had just done crashed down on them like a tidal wave. They hadn't just detained an innocent man, they had drawn weapons on a federal agent. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some people gasping audibly while others began clapping. A few shouted supportive comments toward Marcus, praising him for remaining calm under such intense scrutiny. Phones continued to record, capturing every detail of the officers' mortified expressions. One teenager turned to his friend and whispered, "Man, they messed up big time." Despite the growing commotion, Marcus remained composed. He tucked his badge back into his pocket and crossed his arms over his chest, studying the two officers with a mixture of disappointment and restraint. "Now," he said, his tone icy yet controlled, "are we done here, or do you plan to continue accusing me of crimes I haven't committed?" Keller stammered, struggling to form coherent sentences. We didn't know," he managed, trailing off awkwardly. Monroe chimed in, her voice trembling. "Sir, we're sorry. We thought you were acting suspiciously." Marcus raised an eyebrow, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Suspiciously?" he echoed, letting the word hang in the air. "Because I was looking at headphones, because I dressed nicely today, because of the color of my skin?" Each question landed like a punch, forcing the officers to confront the uncomfortable truth about their actions. Neither Keller nor Monroe could meet his gaze. They glanced at each other, then at the floor, their earlier bravado replaced by shame and regret. But Marcus wasn't finished. "You need to understand something," he continued, his voice rising slightly to ensure everyone heard him. "This isn't just about me. This happens every day to countless people who don't deserve it. People who aren't FBI agents. People who don't have badges to protect them. What you did here today was wrong, plain and simple. And if you don't learn from this, it'll happen again." His words resonated deeply with the onlookers, many of whom nodded in agreement. Some even cheered softly, grateful that someone had finally called out the injustice. But despite the public support, Marcus knew that holding these officers accountable wouldn't be easy. They might apologize now, but true change required more than empty words. It required action. As if to prove their remorse, Keller and Monroe attempted to salvage the situation. "Sir, we really are sorry," Keller said, his voice tinged with desperation. Can we search you? Just to confirm you don't have anything on you. It'll help us close this case cleanly." Their request was absurd, bordering on laughable. After everything that had transpired, the wrongful accusation, the drawn weapons, the blatant racial profiling, they wanted to pat him down. Marcus stared at them incredulously, his jaw tightening. "Are you serious right now?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You've already embarrassed yourselves, and me, in front of half the mall. Now you want to escalate this further?" Monroe stepped forward tentatively, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Please, sir," she pleaded. "It's protocol. We're trying to do our jobs." Marcus shook his head, his frustration evident. "Your protocol is the problem," he shot back. "You're using it as an excuse to justify bad behavior. If you're so desperate to save face, fine, go ahead. But remember this moment the next time you decide to profile someone based on nothing but stereotypes." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed to the search, knowing that refusing would only fuel their defensiveness. As Keller and Monroe patted him down, their movements were hesitant and awkward, as if they expected him to lash out at any moment. But Marcus stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. When the search yielded nothing incriminating, just his wallet, phone, car keys, and a folded document outlining a confidential operation, he arched an eyebrow mockingly. "Satisfied?" he asked dryly. The officers exchanged guilty glances, their faces pale with dread. Then fate dealt them another blow. During the search, Monroe accidentally glimpsed part of the folded document Marcus had been carrying. Her eyes widened as she recognized the classified insignias printed on it. "What is this?" she blurted out, her voice shaking. Is this related to national security?" Marcus sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "That's none of your concern," he replied curtly. "But congratulations. You've now potentially compromised sensitive material because of your reckless behavior. How does that make you feel?" The officers froze, the gravity of their mistake sinking in fully. They weren't just dealing with a wrongful accusation anymore. They had inadvertently put themselves, and possibly others, at risk by mishandling classified information. The implications were staggering, and the fear in their eyes was undeniable. As the reality of the situation dawned on everyone present, the mood in the store shifted once again. The crowd, which had initially been outraged on Marcus's behalf, now watched the officers with a mix of pity and disdain. Some muttered comments about accountability, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. For Marcus, however, the ordeal was far from over. He knew that this incident would spark conversations far beyond the walls of the electronics store, and that its ripple effects would be felt for weeks, months, or even years to come. With one last glare at the officers, Marcus turned on his heel and walked away, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions. The crowd parted respectfully as he passed, many offering nods of solidarity or quiet words of encouragement. Though the confrontation had left him drained, Marcus couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this moment would serve as a catalyst for change, not just for these officers but for the system they represented. By the time Marcus left the electronics store, word of the incident had already begun to spread like wildfire. The videos recorded by onlookers were uploaded to social media within minutes, accompanied by captions that ranged from outraged to supportive. Hashtags like "You're Justice for Agent Hayes" and racial profiling quickly gained traction, drawing attention not just locally but across the country. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, airing clips of the confrontation, alongside interviews with eyewitnesses who described the scene in vivid detail. For Keller and Monroe, the aftermath was nothing short of a nightmare. As soon as their supervisor heard about the incident, they were summoned to the police station for an emergency meeting. Chief Daniels, a seasoned officer with decades of experience, listened intently as the two rookies recounted what had happened, or at least their version of it. Both officers tried to downplay their actions, framing the encounter as a simple misunderstanding, but Chief Daniels wasn't buying it. "You drew your weapons on a federal agent," he said, his voice low but laced with disbelief. "Not just any federal agent, an FBI operative. Do you have any idea how serious this is?" He leaned forward in his chair, fixing them with a piercing stare. "This isn't just about embarrassing yourselves or the department. This is about accountability. You acted recklessly and now we're dealing with the fallout." Keller shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. "Chief, we didn't know he was an agent," he stammered. "If we'd known..." "That's exactly the problem," Chief Daniels interrupted, slamming his fist on the desk for emphasis. "You shouldn't need to know someone's profession before treating them with basic respect. What if he hadn't been an FBI agent? What if he'd been an ordinary citizen? Would that make your behavior okay?" Monroe chimed in nervously, her voice trembling. "We were following protocol, sir. We thought he might be shoplifting." "Protocol doesn't mean profiling," Chief Daniels shot back, cutting her off mid-sentence. "And let's talk about that protocol of yours. Did either of you see him take anything? Did he act aggressively toward you? Or did you jump to conclusions based on assumptions you can't even admit to yourselves?" The room fell silent. Keller and Monroe exchanged guilty glances, neither willing to answer directly. It was clear that Chief Daniels had hit a nerve. Their initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by shame and fear of the consequences looming over them. Meanwhile, outside the station, public opinion was divided. Some people defended the officers, arguing that they were simply doing their jobs and reacting to suspicious behavior. Others condemned their actions, pointing out the glaring racial undertones of the encounter. Social media became a battleground, with heated debates erupting in comment sections and forums. One viral post read, "Imagine being accused of a crime because of the color of your skin. Now imagine being an FBI agent and still getting treated like a criminal. Systemic racism isn't just a phrase. It's real, and it's destroying lives." Marcus, however, refused to engage in the online frenzy. While others debated his case, he focused on using the platform he'd inadvertently gained to advocate for meaningful change. Within days of the incident, he granted several interviews to major news networks, speaking candidly about his experience. In one particularly poignant interview, he addressed the camera directly, his tone measured but impassioned. "This isn't about me," he began, leaning slightly forward in his chair. "I'm fortunate. I have resources and protections that many people don't. But think about those who don't have badges or credentials to shield them. Think about the countless individuals who face discrimination every single day, not just from law enforcement, but from society as a whole. My story isn't unique, it's just more visible because of who I am. And that visibility needs to count for something. He went on to emphasize the importance of reform within policing systems, calling for increased accountability, better training, and stricter measures to address implicit bias. We need to move beyond apologies and empty promises, he said. Real change requires action. It requires policies that prioritize fairness and justice over prejudice and fear. Until we tackle these issues head-on, incidents like mine will keep happening, and innocent people will continue to suffer. His words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking conversations far beyond the confines of the interview. Activists praised him for turning a personal ordeal into a call for systemic reform, while critics accused him of grandstanding. But Marcus remained undeterred, channeling the momentum into concrete efforts. He partnered with civil rights organizations to draft proposals aimed at reducing racial profiling and increasing transparency in law enforcement practices. He also worked closely with community leaders to organize town hall meetings where citizens could share their own experiences and demand accountability from local authorities. Back at the police department, disciplinary hearings for Keller and Monroe were scheduled. Internal investigations revealed lapses in judgment and improper use of force during the confrontation with Marcus. While some colleagues rallied around them, claiming they were being unfairly targeted, others acknowledged that their actions warranted serious consequences. The tension within the department was palpable, with officers whispering anxiously about the potential repercussions. When the hearing finally took place, both Keller and Monroe faced tough questioning from a panel of senior officers and independent reviewers. They admitted to making mistakes but argued that their intentions had been good. "We weren't trying to harm anyone," Keller insisted. "We honestly believed we were preventing a crime." "And therein lies the issue," one reviewer countered. "Your beliefs were based on stereotypes rather than facts. That's not acceptable, not in this line of work." Ultimately, the panel decided on a course of action. Keller, whose conduct was deemed especially egregious due to his aggressive behavior, was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending further evaluation. He was also required to undergo extensive sensitivity training and counseling. Monroe, while sharing blame for the incident, received a lighter punishment: mandatory retraining and reassignment to desk duty for 6 months. Both officers were warned that any future infractions would result in immediate termination. The verdict sent shockwaves through the department. Some officers viewed it as a necessary step toward rebuilding trust with the community, while others saw it as overly harsh. Either way, it underscored the growing pressure on law enforcement agencies to address systemic issues head-on. For Keller and Monroe, the road ahead promised to be difficult. Their careers hung precariously in the balance, and the stigma of their actions would likely follow them for years to come. As the dust began to settle, Marcus reflected on everything that had transpired. Though the incident had been emotionally draining, it had also reignited his passion for advocacy. He realized that his position as a federal agent gave him a unique opportunity to drive change, to amplify voices that often went unheard, and to challenge systems that perpetuated inequality. With renewed determination, he vowed to keep pushing forward, knowing that the fight for justice was far from over. One evening, as he sat alone in his living room scrolling through messages of support from strangers around the world, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Despite the pain and frustration of recent days, he felt a flicker of hope. Change was possible. It was slow, messy, and imperfect, but it was possible. And for the first time in a long while, he felt optimistic about the future. The weeks following the incident were a whirlwind of activity for Marcus Hayes. The viral nature of the confrontation had thrust him into the national spotlight, transforming him from a private individual enjoying a rare day off into an accidental symbol of resistance against racial profiling and systemic injustice. While some might have shied away from such attention, Marcus embraced it, not for personal gain, but because he saw an opportunity to create lasting change. Every morning began with a flurry of emails, calls, and messages from journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens eager to hear his perspective. Some thanked him for speaking out. Others shared their own stories of discrimination at the hands of law enforcement. Each message reinforced the importance of what Marcus was doing. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about all the people who felt voiceless, unseen, and unheard. He knew that if he could use his platform effectively, he might be able to amplify those voices and push for meaningful reform. One of the first steps Marcus took was reaching out to prominent civil rights organizations. Groups like the NAACP, ACLU, and local advocacy coalitions welcomed his involvement, recognizing the unique position he held as both a victim of racial profiling and a federal agent. Together, they drafted proposals aimed at addressing key issues within policing systems across the country. These included mandatory implicit bias training for officers, stricter accountability measures for misconduct, and community oversight boards designed to ensure transparency and fairness. Marcus also worked tirelessly to educate himself further on these topics. He attended seminars, read books, and listened to experts discuss the root causes of systemic racism in law enforcement. What struck him most was how deeply ingrained these problems were, not isolated incidents caused by a few bad apples, as many argued, but symptoms of a much larger issue. This realization only strengthened his resolve to tackle the problem head-on. In addition to policy work, Marcus became a vocal advocate for storytelling as a tool for change. He believed that sharing personal experiences could humanize the statistics and headlines that often dominated discussions about racial injustice. To this end, he helped organize town hall meetings in communities affected by police misconduct. At these events, residents were invited to speak openly about their encounters with law enforcement, whether positive or negative. Marcus moderated several sessions, ensuring that everyone's voice was heard without judgment or interruption. One particularly memorable meeting took place in a small auditorium on the outskirts of the city. The room was packed with attendees, young and old from diverse backgrounds, all united by a desire to see change. As people stood up to share their stories, emotions ran high. A young mother recounted being pulled over repeatedly while driving, through predominantly white neighborhoods simply because she didn't look like she belonged. An elderly man described being frisked outside a grocery store despite having done nothing wrong. And a teenager tearfully admitted that he avoided going out at night for fear of being targeted. Listening to these accounts, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. Though he had experienced discrimination firsthand, hearing others' pain made it feel even more urgent to act. After each story, he offered words of encouragement and solidarity, reminding the audience that their experiences mattered and that together they could demand better. Meanwhile, the fallout from the incident continued to ripple through the police department. Officers Keller and Monroe faced not only professional consequences, but also intense public scrutiny. Their names and faces had been plastered across news outlets, making them pariahs in certain circles. Some colleagues distanced themselves, fearing guilt by association, while others quietly expressed sympathy, though never publicly. For Officer Keller, the pressure proved too much to bear. Within weeks of the disciplinary hearing, he submitted his resignation letter, citing stress and irreparable damage to his reputation. In a brief statement released through his lawyer, he apologized again for his role in the incident, but insisted that he had never intended to harm anyone. His departure left a bitter taste among many, who viewed it as an attempt to escape accountability rather than face the full weight of his actions. Officer Monroe, on the other hand, chose a different path. Determined to salvage her career, she threw herself into the mandatory sensitivity training and counseling programs assigned to her. During these sessions, she confronted uncomfortable truths about her own biases and the systemic flaws within the department. Though the process was grueling, she emerged with a newfound understanding of the impact her actions had on others. When her 6-month reassignment to desk duty ended, she requested permission to participate in community outreach initiatives, a move that surprised many, including Chief Daniels. "I want to make amends," Monroe explained during a private meeting with the chief. I know I can't undo what happened, but maybe I can help prevent it from happening again. Though skeptical at first, Chief Daniels agreed to let her take on a limited role in outreach efforts, provided she remained under close supervision. Her willingness to grow and learn earned her cautious respect from some quarters, though others remained wary. For Monroe, the road to redemption would be long and fraught with challenges, but she was determined to walk it. As months passed, Marcus noticed subtle shifts in public discourse surrounding law enforcement. Conversations that once centered solely on punishment for individual officers began expanding to address broader systemic issues. Legislators introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within police departments, while advocacy groups launched campaigns to educate the public about their rights during interactions with law enforcement. Despite these promising developments, Marcus knew there was still much work to be done. Change was slow, and resistance to reform remained strong in certain areas. But he refused to lose hope. Every new policy proposal, every successful town hall meeting, and every supportive message from a stranger reminded him why he kept fighting. On a personal level, Marcus found solace in reconnecting with his family. The ordeal had taken a toll on him emotionally, and spending time with loved ones helped ground him. His wife, Sarah, often joked that he'd become a reluctant celebrity, teasing him gently about the constant media attention, but beneath her humor lay genuine pride in how he'd handled the situation with grace and dignity. "You're doing something important," she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch. "Not everyone gets the chance to make a difference like this. Don't forget that." Her words stayed with him long after their conversation ended, echoing in his mind whenever doubts crept in. Yes, the journey was difficult, and yes, progress sometimes felt agonizingly slow. But Marcus couldn't deny the sense of purpose he felt, a feeling that had been missing from his life before the incident. As autumn gave way to winter, Marcus reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful day in the electronics store. From the humiliation of being wrongly accused to the overwhelming support he'd received afterward, it had been a roller coaster of emotions. Yet through it all, he had discovered a renewed passion for justice, one that extended far beyond his role as an FBI agent. Looking ahead, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. There would be setbacks, frustrations, and moments when the weight of the world seemed unbearable. But he also knew that every step forward, no matter how small, brought society closer to a future where no one would have to endure what he had. And for now, that was enough. Months had passed since the incident at the electronics store, and life in the suburban mall where it all began had returned to its usual rhythm. Shoppers bustled through the corridors, families enjoyed meals at the food court, and children laughed as they raced toward the arcade. But for Marcus Hayes, returning to this place felt different. It wasn't just nostalgia or familiarity. It was a sense of closure, a quiet acknowledgement that his journey had come full circle. On a crisp Saturday morning, Marcus walked into the same mall wearing the same leather jacket and slacks he'd worn on that fateful day. This time, however, his presence elicited smiles instead of suspicion. Store employees greeted him warmly, some even thanking him for standing up against injustice. Passers-by recognized him from news reports and social media, offering nods of respect or stopping briefly to express their admiration. One elderly woman approached him with tears in her eyes, clutching his hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given us hope." Though humbled by the attention, Marcus remained grounded. He didn't seek praise or recognition. What mattered most to him was knowing that his experience had sparked meaningful conversations and action. As he strolled past the electronics store, he paused for a moment, glancing inside. The display of headphones caught his eye again, but this time there was no tension, no fear. Just memories of how far he and others had come since that day. The aftermath of the incident had been transformative not only for Marcus but also for the broader community. The advocacy work he spearheaded alongside civil rights organizations yielded tangible results. Several municipalities adopted new policies requiring mandatory implicit bias training for law enforcement officers. Community oversight boards were established in multiple cities, giving citizens a voice in holding police accountable. And perhaps most significantly, legislation aimed at reducing racial profiling gained traction in state legislatures nationwide. Marcus's efforts extended beyond policy changes. Through town hall meetings, public speaking engagements, and partnerships with grassroots organizations, he inspired countless individuals to share their stories and demand justice. His message resonated deeply. Systemic change starts with personal accountability and collective action. People who had once felt powerless now believed they could make a difference, and many did, organizing protests, writing letters to elected officials, and volunteering with advocacy groups. Back at the FBI headquarters, Marcus resumed his duties with renewed vigor. Though his role hadn't changed officially, his perspective had shifted dramatically. He became an informal mentor to younger agents, particularly those from underrepresented communities, sharing insights about navigating challenges both within and outside the Bureau. His colleagues admired his resilience and commitment to fairness, often seeking his advice on sensitive cases involving civil rights violations. For Officers Keller and Monroe, the consequences of their actions continued to shape their lives in profound ways. Keller, having resigned from the force, struggled to rebuild his reputation. He found odd jobs around town but rarely ventured out in public, haunted by guilt and shame. Some former co-workers expressed sympathy for his predicament, while others dismissed him as someone unwilling to learn from his mistakes. Either way, his departure served as a stark reminder of the importance of integrity in law enforcement. Monroe, on the other hand, embraced her second chance wholeheartedly. After completing her reassignment to desk duty, she transitioned into community outreach programs, working closely with local leaders to bridge gaps between residents and police. Her efforts weren't always met with open arms. Some community members remained distrustful, questioning whether her transformation was genuine. But she persisted, driven by a desire to prove herself worthy of forgiveness. Over time, her sincerity won over skeptics, earning her cautious trust and respect. Chief Daniels played a pivotal role in supporting Monroe's rehabilitation while implementing sweeping reforms within the department. Under his leadership, the agency introduced stricter protocols for stops and searches, ensuring officers acted based on evidence rather than assumptions. Body cameras became mandatory, and footage was regularly reviewed to identify patterns of misconduct. These measures helped restore some level of confidence among residents, though Chief Daniels acknowledged that rebuilding trust would take years. As winter gave way to spring, Marcus marked another milestone in his journey, the publication of a book detailing his experiences and advocating for systemic reform, titled Beyond the Badge: A Call for Justice. The memoir combined personal anecdotes with practical solutions for addressing racial profiling and inequality in law enforcement. The book quickly climbed bestseller lists, sparking renewed interest in the issues Marcus championed. Readers praised his ability to convey complex topics in relatable terms, making the fight for justice accessible to everyone. In interviews promoting the book, Marcus emphasized the importance of perseverance. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said during one appearance. "It's messy, frustrating, and sometimes painful. But every small victory counts. Every conversation matters. Every person willing to stand up makes a difference." His words resonated deeply with audiences, inspiring them to stay engaged and keep pushing for progress. Activists credited Marcus with reigniting national dialogue about policing practices, while critics accused him of being overly idealistic. Yet Marcus remained unfazed, focusing on the positive impact his work was creating rather than the negativity directed at him. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on everything he'd accomplished, and everything still left to do. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but he felt more hopeful than ever. Society was slowly waking up to the realities of systemic racism and injustice, and people were beginning to demand better, not just for themselves but for future generations. Sarah joined him on the porch, handing him a cup of tea. You've done so much good, she said softly, smiling at him. But don't forget to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. Marcus chuckled, nodding in agreement. You're right, he replied. But honestly, I've never felt more fulfilled. Knowing that my story has helped others find their voices, it's worth every struggle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sky, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He thought about the young mother who spoke at the town hall meeting, the teenager who dreamed of becoming a lawyer to fight for justice, and the countless strangers who reached out to thank him for giving them hope. Their courage reminded him why he kept going, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The final scene unfolded days later when Marcus returned to the mall one last time. Standing near the electronics store, he purchased the wireless headphones he'd admired months ago. As he walked away, a sales associate smiled brightly, recognizing him instantly. Thank you for everything you've done, the young man said earnestly. Marcus nodded graciously, a small smile playing on his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly optimistic about the future, not because the fight was over, but because he knew the world was moving in the right direction. Slowly but surely, change was happening, and Marcus Hayes intended to be part of it every step of the way.